One night, in the middle of his journey to Charan, Yaakov dreams of a ladder reaching up to the heavens. When Yaakov awakes, he exclaims, "God is in this place, and I did not know." Rabbi Lawrence Kushner has devoted an entire book to different commentaries to the phrase, "I did not know," and he shows how each approach can be a basis for spiritual growth. I would like to share with you two of these commentaries and add a third based on ideas we've been developing in our previous lectures. The first approach is that of Rashi. Rashi gives the simple meaning to the phrase, "I did not know." I did not know means I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware that God is in this place. Had I been aware, I would have acted differently. Rashi writes, I would have not have gone to sleep here had I known that this is a holy place. The insight that we could distill from Rashi's approach is the realization that just as God was present there, despite the fact that Yaakov was not aware of it, to think about all the places that God is present in life despite us not being aware of it. And our challenge would therefore be to awaken, to open up our eyes about life and the world around us and the ability to be aware of the presence of God. A different approach is offered by Rav Pinchas Horowitz. He explains the phrase, "I did not know," with the I as referring to the ego. Because Yaakov's ego, he did not know, he was able to ultimately be aware of the presence of God. The idea being that when someone is filled with their ego, the ego is what separates from me to others. The ego is what separates from me from God. Somebody who's filled with his own ego is involved with himself, he sees himself, and cannot see anything around him. In a similar vein, the Kotzker Rebbe explains the verse in which Moshe says, "I will stand between you," meaning the Jewish people, and God. The Kotzker explains that statement as saying that it is the I which is standing between us and God. Based on ideas we've mentioned in previous lectures, I'd like to offer an explanation which in many ways is the exact opposite of that of Rav Pinchas Horowitz. The opposite, although as we will see, it's not contradictory, but rather complementary. Rav Pinchas Horowitz sees the I as the problem. I would like to suggest that based on what we've learned about Rav Kook, the I is not the problem, what stops you from seeing God, but the I is the solution, the way to get close to God. We saw that Rav Kook writes that the search for one's inner self ultimately will lead him to the place that he meets God, based on the belief that in our innermost core there's something divine in each and every one of us. Rav Kook would explain the pasuk as saying, "Anochi lo yadati," I did not know because I did not know my I, because I did not know my true self. That's why I wasn't able to be aware of God's presence. If I'm out of touch with myself, I'm going to be out of touch with God. So on the surface, these explanations are contradictory. But ultimately, as we all know, there are different levels of identity in each one of us. There are parts of our identity which are ego, that we try to overcome, escape. There are other parts of us which are our true self that we try to unfold. What makes life so difficult that it's often so hard to determine which is which. I would like now to turn to another part of this week's Parsha, which tells about the relationship between Yaakov and his two primary wives, the two sisters, Rachel and Leah. Yaakov had two very different relationships. With Rachel, the relationship focused on the love between them, whereas with Leah, the relationship focused on the many children that they were blessed with. These are each very wonderful things. However, the tragedy of the story in our Parsha is each of the two sisters had a deep longing for that which the other sister had. We know that Rachel, the Torah tells us explicitly, the jealousy she felt for her sister, and she turns to Yaakov and says, "Give me children, or else I'll simply die." We're told also about the sufferings of Leah feeling unloved. The very names that they give to their children reflect this deep longing. Rachel calls her first child Yosef, which means to add on. She receives her first child, but she still does not feel fulfilled. She's right away thinking about having a second child. But tragically, when the second child comes, Rachel dies in childbirth. The Torah tells us that several of the Hebrew names given to Leah's children reflect the hope that because of this child that she has brought to Yaakov, now he will love her. We spoke once about the two stories of creation in Parashat Bereshit. And Rav Soloveitchik, who points out the relationship between men and women as presented in the first chapter of Bereshit is so different from the relationship presented in the second chapter. The first chapter focuses on a relationship based on children, being fruitful and multiplying. The second chapter talks about a relationship based on loneliness and ultimately the desire to be one together. A relationship based on love. The story of Rachel and Leah teaches us how it's so important for the whole to include both aspects of the relationship. Ultimately, we know there's the story of Ruth. When Ruth marries Boaz, the entire community comes out and blesses the new couple. And the blessing that they give to Ruth is that you should be like Rachel and Leah, that through both of them the house of Israel has been built. And I would explain that as a blessing, telling Ruth that she should have a relationship based on love. There's certainly great love between Ruth and Boaz, and based on children. In fact, from Ruth came David HaMelech, the King David, and ultimately the Messiah. But because this part of the story has been a little bit sad with Rachel and Leah, I'll mention that in some ways there is a happy ending, because both Rachel and Leah, what they did not achieve in life, they achieved in death. Leah so much wanted to be close to Yaakov, and today she is buried next to Yaakov in the Marat HaMachpelah in Charan. Rachel so much wanted the children, and she is buried near Beit Lechem, which we're told is the path that, in coming back from exile, a process which has already begun. The Jewish people will pass by the grave of their mother, and Rachel, through the generations, has been the archetype of the Jewish mother, whether in Hebrew, Rachel Imenu, or in Yiddish, English, Mama Rachel. Maybe I'll end. We mentioned earlier that many of the names of the children of Rachel and Leah reflect an unfulfilled longing. However, the name of Am Yisrael is taken from a name which reflects the positive view of life. When Leah gives birth to her fourth son, she says, "This time I will thank God." And therefore she calls her fourth son Yehuda, which is connected to the word Todah in Hebrew, meaning thank you. Am Yisrael, we've gotten the name to be the Jewish people, Yehudim, which reflect that Todah, thank you, is part of our essence. The first word a Jew says when he wakes up in the morning is the first word of the prayer, Modeh Ani, wherein the word Modeh means thank you. We begin the day by thanking God for giving us back our soul. So, to be Jewish is the ability to say thank you, and Shabbat Shalom.